Hi, everybody. Take your seats, please. Thanks. So, I had the privilege 4 years ago of being asked to become an editor-at-large at Penguin Press. And one of the first manuscripts that came, or proposals that came across my desk, was for a family memoir by Griffin Dunne. And at that time, what I knew about Griffin was I was a huge fan of his star movies in the 80s, After Hours, which is now a total classic, directed by Martin Scorsese, produced by Griffin, who was then in his early to mid-20s, and starring Griffin. American Werewolf in London was another one. He then went on and directed movies such as Practical Magic. By the time I was seeing the proposal, he was acting. He had a role, a constant role in This Is Us. He was doing all sorts of things. He'd had a very interesting career. And I didn't know that much more, except that I knew that his aunt was Joan Didion, his uncle was John Gregory Dunne, and his father was the best-selling true crime novelist and writer Dominick Dunne. What I didn't know at the time, but came to as I had the privilege of acquiring the book and working with Griffin as his editor on his memoir, The Friday Afternoon Club, is what a remarkable storyteller he is, what a sensitive, thoughtful, intelligent person is, how funny, and also how much, for all the privilege of his life in Hollywood and New York, all the famous names of everyone that he knew, and truly, I have to tell you, the material of his life was jaw-dropping in its just sheer entertainment value. How much trauma he had endured, the murder of his sister by her boyfriend. She was a rising actress in Hollywood, Dominique, and numerous other things. What I really treasure about this book, which I love, is that from the very beginning, Griffin said he wanted to write a family memoir. And that is what he did. It is truly not just a book about himself. It is a book about this extraordinary, complex, sometimes traumatizing and traumatized clan of great writers and extraordinary people. And he does this with love and compassion and great humor. And I urge you to read the book. It has been an enormous success, and for good reason. Todd Purdum, who is one of my favorite journalists and authors and people, he's just an absolute gentleman. He's an advisor to our conference. He's going to be in conversation with Griffin, and I can't think of a better person. Todd's purview is almost everything you can imagine. A great political writer. He's written for the Times for many years. He wrote for the Atlantic, and he's written 4 books, the most recent of which is his wonderful biography of Desi Arnaz, which just came out. Really terrific book. Todd is one of those people who sees the world, politics, culture, literature, all at one table. And I couldn't agree more, and I think that's where Griffin comes from, too, and I think they're going to have a wonderful conversation. They'll be signing up at the 10 afterwards. Thanks so much.
Coming, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here with Griffin.
Me too.
I loved his book. John is right about it, and I do hope you all read it. So, Griffin, you're a writer, director, actor, producer, documentarian. Your mother was a railroad heiress and the confidant of some of the most famous people in Hollywood. Your father, a best-selling novelist and magazine writer. Your aunt was Joan Didion. Your uncle was John Gregory Dunne. You knew Harrison Ford when he was a carpenter and a pot dealer. You were rescued from drowning by James Bond, and you took Princess Leia's virginity. So,
Not bragging.
What made you think you had a memoir?
You know, even I knew I've always been a storyteller. I'm from a long line of storytellers, and I've been told. I remember being told stories that my mother would say about my heiress, about my Griffin Wheel Company roots of her on her father's side, and the infidelities and the crazy behavior, and all those stories from the moment I was told them, they just were embedded in my brain, and I would just keep track. At some point, starting about 6-7 years ago, I realized, you know, I've been dining out on these stories of you know, crazy behavior, and so I started to keep a list of, should someday I write a memoir, because I'm the only one who's going to remember all this stuff, and off I went.
You grew up in a home with a lot of joy and ebullience and plenty of love, but also a lot of secrets and dysfunction. And you said that your brother Alex's injunction to you when you asked him if it was okay if you did this, he just said you should tell it from a place of love. So as you began thinking about the actual writing of it, how did that manifest itself in your work, and how did you approach it?
Well, that indeed, it was, I could not write the book about my family. The subtitle was always a family memoir. I did not know what the title was until John Burnham actually thought of it for me. He was my editor. But John and Joan and my father and Dominique, many of the people I would be writing about were no longer with us. But my brother was an extraordinary, brilliant kid, just and so sensitive, and who I think would have been probably the best writer in all of the Dunnes, had he not been felled with bipolar. And he had a tremendous period in his life of mental struggle that affected us all. And I could not write a family memoir without talking about Alex's struggles. And so I went to him and I said, Alex, I'd like to write this book, but I can't do it without, it's not going to be just about that. It's going to be about this 8-year-old boy who was reading philosophy, and it'll be all the things of your personality and your humor. But he said, okay, stop. You can write about me whatever you want. Just have it come from a place of love. And I went, it liberated me. It was a note that gave me the freedom to write about something, for example, that was never discussed between my father and I, of his closeted life, something we always knew, about all the struggles and ego and failures and high points and low points and the way our family at times would turn on each other, and because I knew the ending, I knew how I felt about them. I knew whatever I wrote would be filled with love.
Did you sort of keep that as a mantra above your desktop?
It was like a burning. It's what compelled me to keep writing. I would literally be shooting, I'd be on set. They'd say, turning the camera around. I'd run back to my dressing room and start typing, picking up right in the middle of a sentence, because I enjoyed the company of my family. They were all there. I felt like, not in a corny way like go Griffin go. It was just like I'm describing them, and they just became so alive. In my office I have one of those cork boards and pictures of them, and framed pictures around my house that have been around for decades and decades. But when I was writing it, I'd pass the framed photos and it would like shimmer, and
as if they'd come to life,
as if they were like alive, and it was heart thumping, and that's why the saddest part was finishing it.
Is there a sequel?
I don't know that I have the perspective quite yet, but I've got that drawer with the little stories on it. This will be one.
You grew up in Santa Monica and Beverly Hills when they were both still really comparatively small towns.
Yeah.
Your beach house, your neighbors were the Lawfords, just at the moment that their brother and uncle were becoming president of the United States. You had a lot of misadventures. Can you talk a little bit about that scene, that Hollywood in the days when movie stars would still easily go out to dinner in public in Beverly Hills and not live behind gated compounds? And
Yeah, I only wish I was old enough to be a participant, because they really had an incredibly, just a great time. And I'm lucky enough to have these scrapbooks that my father kept, these leather-bound. He was a very good social photographer, and
with his Rolleiflex, right?
well, yes, he's a Rolleiflex, and he'd take pictures of gangsters and movie stars and stick the camera right in their face, and somehow, but thank God he has it, because I got pictures of Sidney Korshak that he would iron into his scrapbooks, and all these.
Warren Beatty playing the piano.
Warren Beatty playing the piano, and Dennis Hopper coming in with Brooke Hayward and.
Cecil Beaton eating an ice cream cone with a spoon, right?
Cecil Beaton. I mean, these Natalie Wood checking her lipstick with a silver knife. And I've got all those books, and there are about 12 of them, and they're an incredible document of Hollywood in a very interesting period, because not really great work was being done between 1960 and really till Dennis Hopper came out with
Easy Rider.
Easy Rider, and then Hollywood was forever changed. So, but this was a world where maybe, there were Billy Wilder and William Wellman and David Niven and all these people who were sort of in the last period of their career. Their greatest days were, in the 40s and 50s, and some were old enough to have come out of silent pictures. But no matter their age, they partied really hard. People stayed up late. My parents would give parties. They'd have a little string orchestra, and people would dance and stay up till 4 or 5 in the morning. We'd be upstairs pretending to sleep. And they'd go to the studio with their hangovers and just keep on working. But, even at the beach, there was our house. On the other side of the house was William Randolph Hearst's beach house that he built for Marion Davies, and our house, and then Peter Lawford's house, and his son Christopher and I became best friends, and that is where sort of my obsession with the Kennedys began, I just loved Jack Kennedy, and found his mother, his wife, as beautiful as my mother, and I didn't put this in the book. I was reminded of it talking to somebody this weekend, of the helicopter. The president's helicopter landed on the beach, like in front of our house. It was one of the greatest moments of my life to see that, and there was lots of partying going on next door. But the weird thing is, my father, who's a Catholic, Irish Catholic. Here was the president, the first Irish president, or a candidate at this time. He voted for Nixon. He ran a group called Catholics Against Kennedy, and would campaign. And I was too young to protest, but I'm still baffled by this. And then when the president would go next door, and there'd be a party that Peter gave with Marilyn and everybody, he wasn't invited, and was baffled. So, I was...
Paybacks are a bitch.
What? Paybacks a bitch.
So, your memoir is a tricky genre, and you confess that in your childhood you had a streak of fabulism. And the Kennedys are at the center of one of the great stories. Can you tell what happened when your family went to Mass at Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills and you decided you were going to stay home? What did they tell you when they came back?
So, we had church. We went to Mass every Sunday in Beverly Hills, and it was a church all the movie stars went to and everything. And in the parking lot, there were a lot of extravagant cars, and we called it Our Lady of the Cadillacs. And one day, for no particular reason, I'm about 8 years old, I said, I don't want to go to church. I don't want to go. And my dad's going, get in the car, get in the car. And I went, I don't want to go. I don't know what possessed me to be so rebellious, but I refused to go. And you know, I had pictures of the president and his wife, and I used to write him letters, and I would get a response from his secretary, Mrs. Lincoln was her name. And when John was born, I made a little paddle for him to spank John, if that isn't as ass-kissy enough as you could be. And so anyway, they go to church, and then they come back, and my brother and sister come running in hysterical going, "We met the Kennedys, we met the Kennedys." And I'm told that the president and Mrs. Kennedy sat in front of them at church, and they were introduced. And I was devastated. I couldn't believe I missed one day of church. And it was a bit of a religious lesson, too, like... And I could not bear this. And so I went to school, and I went to school at a place called Curtis, and it was, again, another place for showbiz and their kids.
Still is.
It still is, yeah. And I knew there was not many Catholics in the school, so I thought I could get away with this, which I did, and I told the story about how I sat behind the president, and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, "Mr. President, my name's Griffin Dunne. I wrote you the letter about, you know, I told you it was my birthday," and he went, "Oh, Jackie, this is the little boy I was telling you about. He's the one, and I told him about a kid I hated named Bobo Lewis, and he went, "I didn't like the sound of that Bobo." And we're having this conversation, and I'm telling everybody at school this.
Making the whole thing up.
I'm making the whole thing up, of course. And this story, it went over great. And then I found myself telling it, like, still telling it in high school. And then altering it, though, to, you know, bring in the Secret Service and have it conform to reality a little bit more. And then I'm 18, and I go to I'm at my first day at the neighborhood playhouse. And I'm starting my new life in New York. And after school, our first day, we go to a coffee shop right near the playhouse. And I'm with these kids who I'm going to be with at least the next 2 years, and maybe I'll know for the rest of my lives. And I start to tell them the Kennedy story. And I go, and so I sat there, and I tap on the shoulder of the president, and I say, "No, I can't tell this story. I can't tell, it's bullshit. I didn't do this." They went, "What?" And I said, "I never met the fucking Kennedys." And they went, "All right, we never said you did." And I said, I'm not going to begin my new life with a lie. So I called my brother, and I said, "Listen, I got to tell you something. I've been dining out on your experience for so long. I've been telling everybody I met the Kennedys, and that's your story to tell, not mine." And he goes, "Wait, what are you talking about?" I said, "Remember when you went to church, and you and Dominique, you met the Kennedys?" "Oh, we didn't meet the Kennedys." Dad was so angry that you wouldn't go to church. He told us to tell you that we met the Kennedys. So I was telling a lie on a lie.
You know, you mentioned your dad's photography and his scrapbooks, and when he published his wonderful book,
Yeah.
The Way We Live Then, Recollections of a Well-Known Name Dropper, there was a wonderful book party for him at our friend Tita Khan's in Beverly Hills. And he took me aside as I was leaving and said, "Todd, I want you to understand, this isn't just celebratory, this isn't just ham and jam," because his life had changed very much by then, and he'd gone through a period of great reflection. And he seemed compelled to let me know that while these pictures on the surface looked very glossy and happy, they hid other things below. And I just wonder now if you could talk a little bit about when you began to learn that not everything on Walden Drive was the way it looked to the outside.
Yeah, you know, it was a real evolution of my own character to get to a point. You know, I was always terribly embarrassed to say I was from Beverly Hills, and you'd have to pull it out of my teeth to find out, you know, if someone in New York, they'd say, you know, "I know I'm from LA, what part," and I'd finally admit to Beverly Hills. And then growing up around show business, and so like even when that book came out with all those extraordinary photos, I felt betrayed that, you know, I would be now pegged as a rich kid because we're sitting there in our robes, matching robes, and with our childhood, and it looked so privileged and everything. And it was also, I guess, there was a lot of secrecy growing up, and it was my father was a very, very different man when I was a child. All those pictures that he was taking, and the ironing of the photos fresh from the dark room into these leather scrapbooks, it was as if he knew it wouldn't last. And he was right, it didn't. And he suffered at his own hands. It was a self-inflicted wound of drinking and certain superficial priorities on celebrity, and he lost his marriage, which was despite his sexual preference, probably, his heart always belonged to my mother. He never stopped calling her his wife. But once everything was sort of taken away from him, and he went into self-exile, and he literally drove up the coast. He sold his beloved Mercedes and drove up the coast in like a Ford Pinto or something, and until it broke down in Oregon, in this little town in Oregon, and he lived in this cabin without a phone. And he did the work, and he drove on these windy roads to AA every day, and he would write these letters, pages and pages of single-spaced letters to his children. And they were like workshops for him to find his voice.
And you accessed those in your own writing.
And I include them because they're extraordinary. And he's already telling stories, and he's already, with each letter, his voice is coming out stronger and stronger. And the refrain is, "I know I'm going to be a writer. I know it." And
up to that point, he had been a producer, a stage manager in the early days of television.
He was right in the earliest days of live television, and that led to being at Playhouse 90, and then later an executive of a place called Four Star that was a very classy production company.
Dick Powell, David Niven,
and Charles Boyer, and Four Stars. And also, it was always remarkable, and I never have a satisfactory answer to this. Television and movies were two different planets. They did not interrelate the way they do now. How a television executive, not even a producer, it's not like he was an Aaron Spelling, how he was, and my mother, but he was the catalyst, were able to bring in the greatest, most glamorous movie stars and up-and-coming movie stars to our homes and drink our booze, and also be invited to every party. It was unheard of. And I give that totally to his charm, but also to his energy of, this is what I want to do.
He was working it.
And once you pulled all that away, now who the hell am I? And he was brave enough to look at what was in there. Is it empty? What's been overlooked? And let's fill it up.
Well, I can say from experience that there are people today in the sober community of L.A. who attest to the fact that your father helped them get better, they were captivated, among other things, by his story.
He gave the greatest rooms in AA history. It would like he was showing up at Caesars. Like, oh, Dominick Dunne's, he's the speaker.
Hi, Dominic.
Hi, Dominic.
Yeah.
No, his story, and that was another way he refined his narrative.
So despite these undercurrents, you did have a pretty extraordinary teenage years, and I loved your story about when you're 14 and you and your friend take your mother's car one night. You have a little bit of trouble, I think, seeing over the steering wheel. You're driving around Beverly Hills on a certain night and a certain year, and suddenly the police are everywhere, and you're afraid they're after you, but why are they really there?
Yes, well, so yes, my best friend Charlie and I were obsessed. We were 15, and like any kid in Los Angeles, you're going to go on the day of your birthday to the DMV to get a driver's license. And we just couldn't wait. And we were actually looking at cars, to maybe steal, that they would leave on our street, with the keys in it. And we decided to steal my mother's car. And we got phone books so we could see over the steering wheel. And it was about 4 in the morning. We rolled it down the hill, And Charlie was driving, and we're going up, and we thought Benedict Canyon will be really easy to maneuver, and it's a lot of turning. And all of a sudden, we're coming around a corner, and there the sky is just filled with helicopters and police cars as far as you could see. And we're approaching a man with a clipboard, and he's watching this, and he sees like two midgets coming up toward them. And Charlie turns to me and said, "Your mom must want her car back really bad." And then we come around, and then I realize, of all days, I realize where we were, where we're passing. The guy sees us. We're low priority. Just go. And we're passing Cielo Drive, the Tate, where the Tate murders had taken place. They'd found the bodies that morning. And we went, we drove by, we were chilled. And then we went, we returned the car, and everything, like Los Angeles, everything had a darkness, and ours started right at that moment. The car we were driving was called a Lincoln Cougar, and it even that looked ominous, and the phone books felt soiled, like from our sweat, felt sticky blood, and we went to this coffee shop. It was an all-night coffee shop, and and we were telling somebody else who'd overheard our thing, but I didn't say, Charlie was doing all the talking, and I was thinking about Tate's friend, sorry, my brain just went off. Not Roman. The
hairdresser?
Jay Sebring. Jay Sebring, I'm sorry. I just lost it for a second. Jay Sebring was my father's barber. And, as a kid, I used to go with him on Saturdays while he had his hair cut. And Jay would, put the thing around me and pretend to cut my hair. And he'd go, "Hey, kid, the ladies are going to kill for you. You're going to knock them dead." And I went, "Ooh, girls." He goes, "Hey, you just wait and see. You're going to be a lady killer." And I hadn't thought of that in a million years. Anyway, it was all very, wow. But yeah, I felt it was a very Zelig-like moment, though.
The Dunnes have sometimes been described as the Kennedys of Hartford, Connecticut, and you had almost, your father was sort of an Anglophile, and you had an almost kind of Anglophilic experience. You were sent off to boarding school at a very young age. You went through a lot of kind of hazing type experiences in that environment. In hindsight, do you think you were sent away because your parents knew at some level that it was better for you not to be in the house, or was it more like social pretensions?
Well, I've often wondered about that. The phrase that the Dunnes were the Kennedys of Hartford was kind of started maybe by my father. The difference is. Well, the Dunnes knew the Kennedys of Hyannis. The Kennedys had no idea who the Dunnes were of Hartford. But I think they were just. I was 11. They were recently divorced. I was a terrible student. It was an early. Candidate as early diagnosed for something called dyslexia, which is relatively unknown then. And so I was being tested, and literally would go to a place where they would test me as an early case for dyslexia, which made me feel, somewhat handicapped. And so between that and because I really wasn't. I was mischievous, but I wasn't like rebellious and throwing tantrums, and I couldn't have been less upset about the divorce. I actually thought it was going to be okay. I mean, Dad was pretty insufferable at that point in his life, and when Dad told us, we were in our living room. He broke down crying, and I felt so terrible. My brother and sister started crying. I looked over to see my mother crying, and I felt so guilty I wasn't crying that I started to fake crying. And then I opened my eyes a little bit, and I see Mom is fake crying. And so I had a real bond with her. So I was kind of like, why am I going to this school? And it's something, and it was an incredibly strict school. I mean, like, it had corporal punishment, and I was swatted. There was a thing where you had to lean on, grab a couch, and there was a paddle with holes in it.
The better to swing through the air.
Yes, to pick up speed. And it would hit you back here and leave holes where it didn't take place, and the rest would turn black from the bruising. And there was it was really a screwed up. But this was very typical probably in many of these boarding schools, and particularly in England. But so this was also a pretension of, like, I think Dad at that point, these were his priorities. He wanted to say, oh, my son's away at school. And that's what, everyone in his world and his generation and all went to Portsmouth and, Exeter and all the best schools. Mine was called Fay, which, it's hard enough to go to an all-boys school and then say you go to Fay.
F-A-Y.
So, yeah.
You faced an awkward reality in that you were often the bridge. There was tension between your dad and your uncle, John Gregory Dunne, and you spent a lot of time with the Didion Dunnes in their house on Franklin Avenue and later in Malibu. And was it awkward for you to be the one who was getting along with him when your father and his brother were often not even speaking?
Yeah, it was a horrible situation. There was. My father and John were very, very close, particularly when he and Joan moved to California. And my mother found them their first house, and which, based on her word, they just got sight unseen. And in that period of Hollywood, Dad introduced John all around, and he met a lot of people. And from his contacts, he was able to write probably the best book about Hollywood still ever written, called The Studio. And then as my father's social, business, money, divorce, drinking, as he went down, John and Joan became up. And then by the 70s, they were right in the zeitgeist of. So they now were very social, and the Spielbergs and all the greatest directors in Hollywood and screenwriters, they all went to their house. And they gave incredible parties on Franklin Avenue. And, my father was going broke. The one thing you never do is, you borrow money, because one is going to feel angered that the other person humiliated them by giving them the money, and the other person is going to wonder, when am I going to get paid back? But that was the least of their problems. And it was an animus that went on for decades. And John and Joan, I was incredibly close to. They somehow got me from the time they met me, and they would always include me in their parties and at their dinners. I was always, of course, the youngest person, and they'd seat me next to a homicide cop and a movie star, and by this point I did know who everybody was, and I knew everybody's movies, and terribly precocious. And when they moved to New York, I would talk to John. He would roll calls, and I was on his phone.
A daily call list.
A daily call list. I was on his phone tree all the time, and Dad was now had just moved to New York and was finding his way, but he had a book that was about to come out in his sort of back pocket. And here he was. He moved to New York, and he lived in an apartment about the size of this rug. And no complaining. He was a different person. And he'd found his purpose. And so now the two men were coming up, and Dad's catching up with John, and Dad's starting to write about crime, and that's John's bread and butter, and now Dad's on bestseller lists. And so every time I would go out with John or Joan, Dad would call me either before or after John was about to call and go, I heard you were at Elio's with John and Joan. And I went, yeah, this is your deal, not mine. But I would try a couple of absolute failure. I would fail several times at attempts at rapprochement with the two of them. It was horrible.
You're literally walking down the street at one point, and he says, "Pass by, pay no attention."
Pass by, don't look up. And I did say, I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I saw it. They wanted to keep walking too. And literally we sat there in the most horrible silence. And I literally asked, how about this weather, huh?
They did make up by the end, right, though?
So in the last year of John's life, he'd always had problems with what he called his ticker. And Dad had, who now totally sober, has a fear of anesthesia. And he was just having something lifted off his skin. But he, under anesthesia, he had such a fear that he had a heart attack on the table, a mild one. But he had a cardiologist ever since. And then one day, last year of John's life, Dad goes to see his cardiologist. And there in the waiting room is John. They have the same cardiologist. And they ignore each other. And Dad picks up a magazine that pretends to read it. And John, or Dad, I'm not sure who said it first, said, "What the fuck are we doing?" And they just looked at each other. And they just started to roar with laughter. And it was like, what are we doing? This is, and they talked on I lost my place on the phone tree.
And they were now
They were it every morning. And they would, roar with laughter, and they'd talk about, and they'd gossip, and they'd talk about the old days, and they'd, talk about, a shitty review for somebody they both didn't like, or, everything. And they were like inseparable. It was, and Dad would say, "Oh, thank God I had that heart attack." And he was grateful to it, right to the end of John's life.
You write with remarkable lack of bitterness about your family and your life and the trauma that I think it's fair to say you underwent. But the last part of your book, the most powerful part of your book, is about the honest-to-God tragedy that struck your family. And about that, you do have justified bitterness. Could you talk a little bit about your sister and
Sure.
what happened?
So my sister, Dominique, is 4 years younger than me. And she was, she and I were very much alike. Alex was always the sort of more eccentric, far more intelligent than all of us sort of person. We used to kid him that he was probably adopted. And John and Joan recognized that about Dominique too, that, she was like, you could just take her anywhere. And we both, when she called me one day, when I was struggling as an actor, and she said, "I want to be an actress." I just wanted to tell you, she's so thrilled to tell me. I went, "Oh God, it sucks. Don't do it. It's the worst. It's the worst. I've been doing it for 4 years. I'm still not doing it. I'm still a waiter. I'm still a popcorn concessionaire at Radio City Music Hall. What are you doing?" And she gets really pissed. And she goes, "This is my dream. This is my dream." We have a little fight, and then we make a joke that we're going to be the Lunts and the Bridges or whatever. And on that call, she had an audition about a week later, and she was on a soundstage a week after that in a TV show called, TV movie of the week, called Diary of a Teenage Hitchhiker. And she was the teenage hitchhiker. She was a star within 2 weeks of that phone call. People just recognized about her, something. And so and then she was cast in Poltergeist. And we were always so amused that I was in a horror movie called American Werewolf in London. She was in Poltergeist. And neither of us really even liked horror movies. But it really, propelled us. During this time, there was a famous restaurant called Ma Maison. And she met the sous chef there when she was having lunch with John and Joan. And so they started this relationship. And they moved in together. And Dad and I always had a funny feeling about him. And I produced a movie called Baby It's You that John Sayles directed and Rosanna Arquette starred in. And it was about a relationship, a high school romance that ended, and the boy, played by Vincent Spano, who's an old, like, tough Italian guy, freaks out. And he doesn't hit her, but it's scary and abusive. And at the end of, Dominique happened to be in town with this guy. I'm only going to say his name once. I'm just going to call him the killer afterwards. His name was John Sweeney. And he came to this rough cut screening, and he came up to me and said, the character's name was the Sheik. I am the Sheik. I am the Sheik. I am that guy. And, you're always getting these, Gavin de Becker wrote a book called The Gift of Fear. And it's all about when you get perceptions like something's not right. That we all know something, we're first warned. We're given it, and you choose to listen, to get in the elevator, not get in the elevator, whatever. And that was my first gift that I ignored. So did Dad. And only my brother said, he's a big phony. There's something wrong with him. It's dangerous. He's dangerous. And he would just, tell Alex. Alex would just call Dominique and go, that guy's a piece of shit. He's a piece of shit. Get rid of him. And by the way, he's huge, this guy. And so she broke up with him. He attacked her. She broke up with him immediately. So it wasn't one of those, I'm going to let him, choke me 3, 4, or 5 more times and then go, and hide in the shelter. It was like, you touch me, I'm out. And then on Halloween Eve, she'd already kicked him out, put all his stuff on the lawn. About a month or so later, he comes back on Halloween Eve and strangles her. And she was on life support for 4 days. And we took her off on November 4th, 1982. And from the moment we took her off life support, we entered the next stage of grief, which is very bureaucratic, because the homicide detective, who we became very close with, was there on the day we did that. And he said, when it was confirmed, he said, I'm now going to the county jail, and this will go from attempted murder to homicide. And there began our next journey, which was through the legal system. And there was a trial.
Which helps transform your father's life and career, because he writes about the trial.
So the night before the trial, or the night before Dad left New York to go to Los Angeles, where we would all be to attend the trial, which, by the way, at that time was rather unusual for families to attend a trial, which was rather off-putting at first to our district attorney, who came to really love. We both came to love and respect each other. But that last night, Marie Brenner, wonderful writer for Vanity Fair, invited my father. He was not, now at this point, he was not going to be, he didn't go out the way he would normally have in his past life, because he didn't want to, have to talk about this. And he didn't want to be, he suddenly found himself being invited because his daughter was murdered. Won't that be great dinner party talk? He didn't, forget it. But Marie coaxed him to come to this dinner and seated him next to Tina Brown, who had just met with Cy Newhouse to take over Vanity Fair magazine. And for whatever reason, Dad just had an affinity for her. And they just sat and they talked like this close. And he just shared his fear of not understanding the legal system and what it was like, if it's going to make my mother had MS, is this going to exacerbate her? Is this trial going to kill us all? And Tina said, if you keep a diary of what you and your family are going through, it'll be one of the first things I publish when I start the magazine.
And it was, and she did,
and it was, and he did, and it was changed his life as a writer. It's changed his life. He hadn't ever been published before, so he became a writer.
Dominick Dunne.
And he became a man who continued to write about crime, but always letting you know who Lana Clarkson, who Felt Spector murdered. It was not just a B-list actress, but let you know about her background and her parents. And the same with The Simpsons and with Nicole and everyone he wrote about. Either, in the batteries and the rape cases, all these people just got off. He would just come at the defense for their outrageous tactics. So the upshot is there's an expression. We were supported by a group called Parents of Murdered Children, which was started by Sharon Tate's mother, in fact. And they were there with us every day in the courtroom. And Sharon had an expression is first they kill your child, and then you go in the courtroom and they kill her again. And that is exactly what happened. And they dragged her memory, and made up all sorts of stuff. And I guess it was effective because the guy got involuntary manslaughter and served a total of 3.5 years. And a very light minimum security thing. And the upshot is there are two moments in my father's life that I'm most proud of. One I wasn't witness to. One was when he was 18 years old in World War II, in the Battle of Mens in the Ardennes forest. He and another soldier who they were being mocked by their platoon for their unmasculine behavior, went in the opposite direction and saved 2 other soldiers.
Won the Bronze Star.
And he won the Bronze Star. The second was when the judge hated us from the word go. And at one point, the killer was so incensed that a previous girlfriend was giving testimony about her jaw and her being broken and her eye socket knocked out and spending 2 months in a hospital. He gets up and says, I don't need this shit, and starts to walk out and is wrestled to the ground and is fighting with rage. He would not let the jury hear the testimony of the woman with a previous history of violence. So the jury never saw this. So, and then he sits, they pull him back, they put him in the chair, and they said, we know what a strain this is for you, Mr. Sweeney. And we looked at each other and went, we're fucked. We're fucked. And then when the judge gave the sentence, the verdict, he said, I want to thank the jury, and I want to thank you on behalf of the Dunne family. And the second moment in my father's life is he stood up and said, don't thank them on our families. You kept important information out, and that judge's life changed forever. All his future, whatever hopes he had to be in the California, they were gone because Dad wrote about it.
And he stood up.
And he stood up, and then it became it's a famous trial for the injustice that took place.
We've tried to save a little bit of time at the end for questions, and mics will be passed around, and I think John's going to come up and call on people because he has field of vision better than mine. Are there any? Don't be shy to raise your hand.
Hi. Any questions?
Somebody.
Yes, right here in the middle. Yep. Thanks.
Given its place clearly in your childhood, what did you think of Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
I watched that movie. First of all, it brought back, it's exactly what it looked like, how he did that visually. The music and the AM radio. But as the movie went on and I knew what was going to happen on Cielo Drive, I thought, I don't think I can make it. I don't think I can make it. I don't think I can see this. I can't. I can't believe he's going to put us through this. I can't believe Tarantino's going to do this. And when he killed them, like he killed the Nazis in Glorious, it was orgasmic. So I love the movie.
Other questions down here? Actually, two. One right behind the other.
Wonderful book. Loved it. You mentioned that your brother gave you permission to write from a place of love. And I feel like you did write from a place of love about everybody in the book. But, you know, you spilled a lot of beans in that book about a lot of people who are not here to read it. And I just wonder, what was your thought process, kind of like privacy after death, and, you know, how did you think that through? You know, Carrie Fisher, you shared a lot of information about Carrie, right? And she wasn't around to read the book. So did she have your permission?
Well, she's the one who brought it up. There's a documentary about Carrie and her mother, and it was HBO, and
A wonderful documentary.
yeah, it's really hilarious. And I'm in it, and I walk up the stairs, and then Carrie spent so much of her time in bed writing books and stuff. So of course our interview was on the bed, and we talked it. She said I relieved her of her hymen. So, you know, she brought it up on HBO. So, and it was been our running joke forever. But I didn't think anything about privacy because, you know, people like Charlie and Gavin and all of us who grew up with Carrie and Beverly and Brooke, goes on and on. We all have a text chain that started from the day Carrie died. Those people were so grateful. They went, God, you got her. It was like, and it was the only time I ever typed and laughed, thinking about the things that Carrie would say to me. There was a woman who, when it was my turn to be deflowered, that I did write about, and I was trying to find her. And she was older than me by like 3 years. I was 13, she was 16 or something. And she could drive, and I couldn't. And I tried to track her down, but I couldn't find her. And then the book comes out, and I gave her a fake name. And the book comes out, and she goes, oh, that was so beautiful. That was exactly right. I wasn't that old. So...
Just by the way, the section in the book where Griffin and Carrie are living together at the Hotel des Artistes when you're 21, and she's shooting some dumb, crazy movie called Star Wars.
Yes.
You're working as a popcorn concessionaire at Radio City Music Hall. It's unbelievable. There's a gentleman with a hat right there. Sorry. Yeah.
Briefly, your father's war experience. I don't think people knew that he was a decorated hero. And how did that affect his relationship with his father?
Well, I was very glad to sort of bring that out. I didn't know he was a war hero until Saving Private Ryan came out. And he went to see that, and it just unearthed the war. And he called me, his experience, and he called me. At that time, he'd been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he called me with urgency. He said, please come over. And I went over there expecting bad news, and he said, did you ever see Private Ryan? I went, yeah. And then he just tells me about this extraordinary act of bravery. And, you know, and then he pulls out the Bronze Star, the ribbon, and hands it to me. And, you know, here's a guy, one of the things that was kind of great about him finding fame, which he always idolized fame, and now he found fame, which he really kind of always wanted. He was old enough to really appreciate it. And he could never get over whenever a cab driver or a movie star or a thing. He once called me from the Chateau Marmont, and he said, I was just in the elevator with Bono, and Bono knows who I am. Can you believe it? And so he was never shy about, you know, I got this award and this guy complimented me about this, and this he never talked about. And he didn't dine out I'm a war hero. That's how embedded that part of it. That was his character, that was there all along. And the same guy who stood up in the courtroom, same guy who wrote all those articles years later.
His father, who had kind of bullied him for loving movies and telling stories of movies, he finally had to respect that.
Exactly. And now his father beat him with a Brooks Brothers belt because, he was in a family of jocks and everything. And Dad, on one side of the room were football pennants of his older brother, and his was like pictures of Betty Davis and Tyrone Power and stuff. And Dad would his father would try to beat the sissy out of him. So when he comes back, and the older brother, he served honorably, but he never saw action. The wrong son came home. And he was heralded. He was in the paper. And I said, what did your dad think of that? Didn't he want to take his medal and go, what do you think of your sissy son now? And he said, after that, I didn't care what he thought. Didn't really matter to me. It was like he'd seen much more serious things and much more cruelty and much more death and horror than an angry father who hates his son.
Another question. There's one down here, and then let's do that, and then if anybody and then we'll go over there. Max.
I so enjoyed your book. Thank you for writing it.
Thank you.
But I am horrified at the injustice that your family suffered. I, like the rest of us, would like to know that something horrible happened to Sweeney.
Well, I spent a good deal of my time after he was released in that short period of time that he spent incarcerated somewhat. I would track him down. I would find out. Sometimes people would write my father, say, one time rather, well, first of all, when he got out, we heard he got a job. My mother organized a picket line, and everybody, Miguel showed up, and all the kids we grew up. By the way, the title Friday Afternoon Club started because Dominique had after their acting class, all the kids, all the beginning of their career, and
George Clooney, Miguel Ferrer,
George Clooney, they would all come to my mom's house after class where Dominique lived, and they would just celebrate and get hammered, and my mom would wheel out in her wheelchair with a bottle of wine, go, here you are, thank you, Mrs. Dunne, and go back. And but they so we would picket. We managed to get him fired from one place. I managed to I got in touch with someone I found out he was dating. Now he's changed his name, and I finally got the girl on the phone to talk to me. I had spoken to the father. Dad had spoken to the father. He says, having no luck. I was able to do it. She broke up with him. He was telling, he wouldn't tell anyone, of course. And then finally he had another job at the Bellage Hotel, and I happened to be, this happens to me all the time, it happens to Dad. I happened to be sitting on a plane with the head of the Bellage Hotel. And I said, oh my God, the guy who killed my sister was working in your kitchen. And he goes, I'm going to take care of it right away. And as soon as the plane lands and everything, he calls me. He says, I can't do anything about it. He put down that he was a felon. And then this killer beats up a busboy, and he was able to do it. He's now in, and I realized it was taking so much out of me. It was literally, I went on for years like this. I was going to drive myself insane, and I finally, I'll never forget, I'll never forgive, but I rather than think like I had been thinking too much about him, I just think about my sister. And so, and all the good shit. And, but now apparently he's in a chef in a senior citizen community somewhere in Oregon or somewhere, which is the only justice, poetic justice is he's serving for a lot of very, very senior people who are not allowed to get near a grain of salt. And here he studied at the Cordon Bleu, and he's making some pretty pasty food, I would imagine.
We've got time for one last question, Max.
Thank you so much for sharing. You mentioned when your sister told you that she wanted to be an actress, you said it was pretty terrible, don't do it. Just curious about your years of struggle and how you maintain this kind of mental fortitude to keep going until your first break, given you've seen so many careers evolve amongst, when you were young. Just talk a little bit about...
Sure. I was very frustrated as an actor, being dyslexic too. I couldn't really do audition readings and things like that. And I had two very, very good friends who were also actors. One was Amy Robinson, who had been an actress in Mean Streets opposite Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro. And their careers went great, and hers went sort of nowhere. And so she was frustrated, and another guy named Mark Metcalf. And we were always like... You got to keep busy. If you're not working, you got to keep busy. So we would rehearse plays that no one would ever see, and then Amy optioned or told us about a book that Ann Beattie had written. She was a New Yorker writer, and this was her first novel. And we, having no idea what we were doing, actually got a hold of Ann Beattie, optioned the book, and made the movie at United Artists. 3 total. Without any experience, but we were helped by so many incredible people. Joan Micklin-Silver directed it with John Hurd and Mary Beth Hurt. And I gave myself a very small part. And the small part got the biggest laugh in the movie. And from that, I ended up at where I always wanted to work, at the Public Theater, Joe Papp's Public Theater. And then it led to American Werewolf. And I was off and running as both a producer and an actor. And I never wanted to rely on just being an actor, because you never know how long that's going to last.
I urge you to think of this conversation only as the trailer, and I really can't commend the book highly enough, and the movie will still surprise you with lots of joyous and wonderful experiences. So thank you so much for
Griffin, Todd, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Todd. That was really great, man.
Great. Thank you.
Have a great lunch. We'll see you back here at 1:30. Thank you for calling McCann.